My name is Giorgios Moutsinas, and the present paper discusses issues of qualitative research methodology in education through the critical review of a corresponding Greek study. Methodology is defined as the pattern of the conduction of a study. Beyond this, the terms of its implementation contribute both to the configuration of its methodological framework as well as to the determination of the method of analysis of its findings. In this context, the employment of qualitative research in the investigation of the dimensions of the Greek and of the international educational system has been for decades established and widespread. However, the limited scope of this approach has been observed. On these grounds, the aim of this paper is to clarify the characteristics of qualitative research methodology in education through the critical review of a corresponding Greek study. In the reviewed research article, initially the significant interrelationship between non-centralized democratic school management, non-exclusive leadership, and shared decision-making is identified. Thus, the reinforcement of schools is possible, together with the amelioration of the subordinate school-teacher levels of trust, commitment, and joint engagement and advancement of each school policy. Consequently, the need for the supportive relocation of the leading school principal's role towards all the teachers of every school through the qualitative investigation of participatory decision-making is highlighted. On the one hand, as strong methodological choices of the authors, in general, the intersubjective understanding and the scientific documentation of the individual research procedures are accomplished. More specifically, the flexibility and the variability of the execution of this particular research project were observed. Firstly, the potential emergence of additional pertinent data besides the devised research questions throughout the employed personal semi-structured interviews and their corresponding allocation in categories for the gradual, comprehensive approach and for the thorough and holistic description, analysis, and insight into the inquired matter were anticipated. Secondly, the integration and the signification of the subjective school-teacher experiences and representations by the broader value and ideological contexts of the investigated school social reality were served. Qualitative methodology. Moreover, in conjunction with the researcher's acquaintance and appreciation for the interviewed school principals, the validation of the interviews in a framework of transparency, flexibility, trust, eagerness of cooperation, and minimal difference of power among the former and the latter can be supported. Thusly, the face-to-face, more direct documenting and the more effective apperception of the occurring school principal stances and impressions via verbal and nonverbal information were permitted. At the same time, the minimum comparability of the derived data was ensured. In addition, both bibliographically, by reviewing studies published in Greek and English language, and empirically, by quoting segments of the interviews, there was sufficient acknowledgement and depiction of the school environment and context of the integration of shared decision-making, sufficing the interpretation of its subjective meaning. Also, the equivalence betwixt the partakers' lived circumstances, background, and views, and the experts' inferences was recognized concerning the participatory school policy, given the penetrative focusing, elucidation, and framing of the complexity and the ambiguity of the said phenomenon, sought within specific school units via the substantial, witnessed, and usable school principal experiences, interpretive paradigm. Likewise, in the appendix of the article, the comments of the interviewees anent the positive contribution of the interviews to their contemplation with respect to the investigated competencies of their directorial role were attached. Finally, the clarity, the cohesiveness, and the interdependence of the compiled narrative research reports, various developed, interrelated inductive thematic categories, and of their associated concepts were noted, in consonance with the current research questions, in order to delineate the scrutinized phenomenon and to confirm its preceding theories. On the other hand, with reference to the weak methodological points of the reviewed study, the inadequate formulation of its research questions and the lack of the explicit wording of its research aims and hypotheses were noticed. Similarly, the course of the deployment of the utilized interview guide was not mentioned, whereas no pilot interview was conducted for its prospective enhancement, referring to subjects instead of participants. Furthermore, the eventual erroneous evaluation, relegation, or magnification of certain data collected by the authors due to their familiarity and to their esteem towards the interviewees presumably restricted research validity and reliability. Indeed, respondent validation or member check was not carried out by returning the texts or the findings of the interviews to the participants and ensuring the identification and the simplification of their attitudes and perceptions. Additionally, the inadequate reflection of the researchers was detected. By not practicing a personal writing style in the first person, their deficient realization of the influence of their subjective actions, inquiries, and commentaries on the meaning and on the framework of the inspected experiences was indicated. Future studies ought to settle the above issues. Moreover, the choice only of purposive or convenient sampling, non-randomized sample, the size 5 high school principals, and the geographical scope, Prefecture of Larissa, Greece, sample accessibility of the research sample, as well as the focus only on the systematic and on the selective participatory decision-making, or on other germane organizational models, constitute methodological shortcomings, narrowing the representativeness and the possibilities of the generalization of the research results. Alternatively, conducting at first deliberate and then theoretical sampling is recommended, producing categories until their theoretical and conceptual saturation, verification, and interconnection. Hence, by increasing evolutionarily the appropriate participants, the extraction of an explanatory analytical model of this particular phenomenon and of its occurrences, applicable and in comparable circumstances, will be enabled. Likewise, given the absence of the conduction of triangulation, hindering research validity and reliability, the triangulation of researchers resulting independently to accordant interpretations, and of sources exploring the perspectives and the viewpoints, and of the case-by-case subordinate teachers, plus of the parents, guardians, and caregivers in schools about the examined topic, is suggested. Lastly, the employment of methodological triangulation is proposed, distributing self-administered questionnaires with closed-ended questions prior to the interviews. In this way, the enrichment of the study with quantitative data will be feasible, rendering it a mixed methods approach and concentrating on finding associations between its individual variables. In order to ensure validity and transferability, in qualitative research, epistemological reservations have been raised apropos of the existence of a single equitable social reality and of the capacities of its equivalent accurate portrayal in virtue of speculative arguments. Notwithstanding a precise, originally dense and realistic, and then an inductive description, explanation, and interpretation of the findings of the reviewed study was effectuated, taking into account the uniqueness of its framework. Also, the formation of the utilized research instrument and the data codification of first and of second order, content analysis and constant comparative method were consistent with the research questions, objective, and bibliographical background. What is more, the interviews were performed in the offices of the participants at the end of their teaching hours, promoting their attentional focus in an atmosphere of comfort, security, and sincerity. Actually, afterwards their preliminary briefing and their consent as concerns the overall process and the insurance of the anonymity of their replies, but not and of their confidentiality, prompts and detecting questions were asked to the interviewees, pursuing the elicitation of detailed responses and reducing to a considerable degree any stereotyped and predefined ones, whilst avoiding leading questions so as to lessen any misconceptions of theirs and interviewers' prejudices, respectively. Accordingly, for the reinforcement of the reliability or credibility of this study, the criterion of the prolonged engagement of its authors in the analyzed matters exists, owing to their service in administrative positions in education, though potentially affecting the unbiased conduction of their research. Furthermore, the reasonable, transclassant, and bibliographically substantiated coherence amongst the theoretical framework of the reviewed article, its posed questions and aims, the adopted qualitative methodology, the majority of the features of the examined sample, and the selection of individual semi-structured interviews for the collection of the data, together with the scrutiny and the commentary of the latter, was noticed. In addition, despite their limited number, school principals of a range of distinctive types of school units, general and vocational high schools of urban, suburban, and rural areas were investigated, and the same procedure was followed in the actualization of all the interviews. By assembling authentic, worthy of trustiness and utile data, equally important findings and results were expounded, and consequential conclusions were drawn. In conclusion, qualitative research designs constitute a legitimate research tool for the approach of broad social and educational issues, not as alternates to quantitative methods, but sufficing the explicit theoretical parameters of each matter under debate. With this in mind, complying with their specific methodological guidelines, qualitative studies, such as the one reviewed in the present paper, allow for the better understanding of micro-sociological educational processes that have corresponding macro-sociological implications. In this slide, a list of selected references has been laid out that were used in order to carry out this paper. Thank you for your attention.